You want to hear some crazy stats? So imagine going from a torn hamstring, being asked to return to play, and then getting back to a 210 kilo back squat in just 6 weeks. Imagine going from a bodybuilding phase back to repping 160 or 170 for reps on the bench pretty easily in that same amount of time, and improving your body composition all as you go through an off-season block. At Seeker Strength, we mostly work with amateur athletes, weekend warriors, people who love to train but don't rely on it for their bread and butter. But we're also lucky enough to work with some incredible professional athletes on a one-to-one basis, and this is the reality of how quickly they can make progress. In June and July of this year, we were lucky enough to work again with a very, very good professional player playing in the UK at the moment. Now, we don't have him here with us today, but we do have a human analogue of our player here.
It's not Gareth, it's Brick Thunderslam, and I'm a professional rugby player.
Just a side note here, this player has not ever or is not currently using PEDs, so you can delete those bitchy little comments right now. So when we begin writing training programs like this, it's incredibly important that we have a system. This makes sure we don't miss out on anything in training and we get repeatable results block on block. It also saves us from doing really dumb variations or strange exercises that we see on the internet. Step 2 is to select your needs. So in this case, we know we want the player to gain a lot of upper body mass, to be in as good a physical shape as possible, and to get stronger in a few key lifts. Step 3 then is pick your specific goals. So in this case, we want to have specific training goals or training outcomes that are going to give us those things we really want when we go back to playing in season. For example, we always hear players saying they want to be more impactful in contact, they want to feel more powerful. Now in many cases, these are very, very vague goals to have. So what you should do instead is you should talk about an ideal body weight to be. Maybe you need to talk about a level of acceleration or sprinting prowess where you're bringing a lot of speed into contact, or you might look at upper body strength to maintain your position very well when you do make contact. For this off-season specifically, we knew this player was going to need a bigger squat. That leaves us with 2 things. First thing we need to do is pick the type of squat they're going to do. Players coming back from a hamstring injury, so we're going to take some of the loading off the posterior chain as there's still a lot of rehab and prehab work going on there. Once we start looking at those options, the front squat really becomes the main option for us. We're going to be able to move a lot of weight. The player has already front squatted 200 kilos at multiple points in his past, and so that's going to be a great option for us. Really good proficiency with the lift, and we know we're going to be able to lift suitably heavy weights for a decent amount of volume. Then we're left with the option of where do we go with the weights. In my opinion, getting over 200 kilos or even getting to 180 or 190 for reps is going to be really beneficial here, which will bring our back squat then to around 210 for a triple if he chooses to test it at the end of the block. The final aspect then of writing a training program, step number 4, is start at the end. What the hell do I mean by this? What I mean is, when you have a certain goal in mind, you don't start writing a training program with your first session. You start off by writing the final session you know you're going to hit, in this case 180 for some easy reps, and then you step back from there. So it'll be 170 for some doubles or triples, then before that 160 for some 3s or 4s. So here are the exact sessions that player did for those 6 weeks. These are all the front squat rep, sets and load that they did, and you'll see at the bottom here we started with our week 6 session. So on week 6 I know I wanted some easy doubles at 180. This meant that they'd easily be getting over 200 kilos if they were to push for 1 rep max. And we also know that they've gotten 200 kilos for 1 rep max around 12 months ago. So these progressions are going to be quite achievable for them. The idea of starting at the end now is really seen when we start actually writing these sessions out. So I start at 180 for doubles. The week previously, I would expect them to do 170 for some pretty easy triples, maybe even 175 for 1 triple. Before that, then we're going to be at around 160 or 165 kilos. And we're definitely going to be hitting 4s and even multiple sets of 3s at that 160 or 165 range. This is how we start writing a training program, with our final session as the beginning of our writing process. Once we've chosen that final session and worked back a few sessions from there, we must look at the shape the player is currently in. So if the player in this case is coming from having not done too many squats, their front squat's going to be around 130 kilos for some sets of 6 or maybe some sets of 5. This gives us a start point, this gives us an end point, and then we have to work out the relative progressions that player is going to make in order to get those 2 points to meet. Now look, it would be really dishonest of me to tell you and go and follow this training style or even follow these exact sessions, even if you're at realistic numbers or you're anywhere close to this. This player's worked with me multiple times in the past. They're a professional athlete for a very good reason, and even though lifting weights isn't their job, they're going to be a hell of a lot better than almost anyone else at it. If you do want a bigger front squat like we've been talking about in this video, go and check out the Seek a Strength app. You can try it out for free during a 7-day free trial, and there's a 12-week front squat program on it. Just 2 sessions per week, all the squats, sets, reps and load you'll need, and the vital accessories to keep you in good positions as you move throughout the block. But the squat was only one aspect of this off season, so the next thing we had to sort out was this idea of body composition and particularly upper body mass. Now, we're in a pretty unique case with this player. He'd just spent 2 months of the in-season time with his S&C coaches, but he was injured. He had had a small procedure done, he had a lower body injury, and so because of that, we got handed a player who is mid-flow with the upper body hypertrophy and strength work, which is the ideal situation for us to get our hands on them. So the player had built all the necessary work capacity, doing all of their upper body bodybuilding, their pressing, their rowing, all of their midline work, and so now we get a player who can transition to a slightly wider grip on the bench press to give them the best possible opportunities to lift big numbers in testing when they go back for their clubs. Most rugby players are going to bench with a slightly narrower grip. It has a bit better transfer, but definitely if you want to be lifting the biggest numbers possible for your testing regimes, that slightly wider grip will afford you a better 1RM number. Needless to say, this is a pretty rare situation. We don't get it all too often, so it's nice when it does happen. So we're going to use the bench as a major mover of some of that upper body hypertrophy work, and it's also going to round off our major strength lifts for the off-season block. Now, when we're looking at body composition, gaining some muscle mass, losing some body fat, it would be remiss of me not to talk about the nutritional aspect and the lifestyle factors that come along with that. In this case, we're lucky to be working with a real pro, and he reached out to a contact of ours and got some great nutritional advice and coaching along that whole process. This makes an absolutely gigantic difference in your off season. Even for the professional players out there, most of them will around a small bit in the off season. Not just taking a holiday, but also going to bed maybe 2 or 3 hours later than they usually would, waking up at different times, maybe just having a slightly more chaotic lifestyle, which they're not afforded to have during their standard professional season. If you wanted to use your off season to get the best gains possible, this kind of regimented structure is going to be hugely valuable, and it affords you the ability to push your training that small bit harder than you would in a standard off-season period when you just arrive at the gym at whatever time you want, you go to sleep whenever you feel tired, and you eat food when you're hungry. So from my point of view, exercise selection for the hypertrophy work is actually quite simple. We know pretty much what every front rower needs. They need good levels of upper back strength, they need a neck that's insanely strong, and they need a midline that can maintain their positions throughout the highest forces you could possibly imagine. So here are all of the exercises we used and how we progress those exercises from week to week. Up first is a pendlay row. I think it's pretty obvious, but a player who makes their living scrummaging should have a strong pendlay row. We started off with some sets of 6, built up to sets of 8 and 10s, and kept pushing that weight aggressively from week to week. We also had seal rows, machine rows, and some lateral rows included in each week, but the pendlay row was our major flagship for that upper body pull exercise. The midline work was pretty heavily influenced by the injury rehab and prehab that was already going on, so we had a lot of side plank, Copenhagen plank, hip flexor raises, and some hanging knee raises in there. I want to take a second at this point to show you just how simple these loading parameters are. It's not any convoluted exercise selection. There's no weird pyramid loading, top set, drop set bullshit going on. It's the correct exercise at the right time with the correct load and the right amount of volume. It's as simple as that. Programming for elite and professional athletes is really no different than programming for you guys at home watching this. They can just recover faster, they can learn movements a bit better, and they have a bit more time to train, so we can push those progressions slightly faster from week to week. It's unfortunate, but it's the truth of the matter. No matter what the sport they're doing, if there's a professional athlete around, they're gonna be better than you at almost everything. We constantly get requests from people looking to run programs faster, make progression sooner, make a 4-day week program into a 6-day week program. But the reality is, most of us just can't make progress that quickly. For most of us, 4 days a week of training is gonna be the perfect amount. So now that that rant is over, I spoke at the start that this player ran a sub 5-minute Bronco test, and this is how we did it in just 6 weeks. So the player had been cleared to return to running and standard training, but we decided to prioritize the off the feet conditioning to majorly bring about those changes in aerobic fitness without massively testing the hamstring or testing any of the other joints that might have been slightly injured during that impact. So obviously we prioritized ergs for this, things like the rowing machines, the stationary bikes and the ski ergs. And what we did was, starting with very simple intervals, gradually increase the intensity of those. So we're going to start off with 15 seconds on and 45 seconds off on the rowing machine or the bike. Then we'll gradually increase that to 20 seconds on, 40 seconds off. Then we'll gradually go 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. And you can see here how the total amount of time we're working for is going to increase. And we're also going to note those calories being used on the rowing machine or the watts outputted, and we're going to make sure the intensity of those sessions is building all the time. The on the feet conditioning work then was done with graded exposures to running. Now, rather than bringing him back and doing a lot of conditioning work with the running, we actually brought him back in with some agility and sprint acceleration work, which gave us the added advantage of increased skill in the sprinting and agility pieces, while also increasing the total amount of cardio work he was doing. This looked like Illinois T drills, it looked like a lot of sprinting and evasion work, and things as simple as 10 meter out and backs, 15 meter out and backs, 10 meter sprints or accelerations with a 3-point stance, 20 meter sprint and accelerations with a 3-point stance. All of these things are slowly gaining the skill of sprinting and moving quickly, while also increasing the overall cardio load for the week. The final step we took then with the conditioning work was to get some specific Bronco practice in. So it's not necessarily running a Bronco test, but it's just getting back on the field and running. In this case, we prioritized physical adaptation rather than the specific outputs that the player is going to use. So we really looked at something like the Norwegian 4x400 and used a slightly altered version of this. This is going to be multiple work rest intervals where we're just monitoring heart rate. The player has a real-time monitor of what their heart rate is doing. We're ensuring they're spending an ideal amount of time in that high heart rate bracket and then gradually increasing that over the final 3 weeks of the off season. The final little nugget here when it comes to that on the foot conditioning is we really need to look to limit those bottlenecks as much as possible. What do I mean by this? Well, a lot of the time when we go to the off-season training periods, people will have a bottleneck of tightness around the ankles, knees and hips when they get back to running and sprinting. Their Achilles might start tensing up, their calves might kill them for days afterwards. And so this forms a bottleneck with our conditioning. What we really want to prioritize, as I mentioned earlier, is the physiological changes that cardiovascular training is going to make. So we can do that with the off the feet conditioning work. We can do it with the sprinting and agility pieces by just having slightly more work introduced from week to week. And then we can get into the bigger running pieces, but use those efficient training methods like the 4x400 or some increased agility volume from week to week to really start introducing those running pieces back in there. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you'd like to guess who that player was, I'd love to see your guesses in the comments down below. If you want to get the best possible off-season training program, check out the Seek Strength app. It's available on iOS and Android. We also have very, very competitive rates if you follow from the link down below. This will give you 4 weeks, 8 weeks, or 12 weeks of off-season strength and hypertrophy work to really set yourself up with the best programming possible to make massive gains in upper and lower body hypertrophy, as well as increasing all of those strength numbers.